You're on?
Yeah, just 1 second. Good to go.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome Mr. Sumit Mittal. He's the CFO at GreenCell Mobility. And we are going to be talking about a subject area and a topic that should be very close to everybody's heart actually here, which is actually the electric bus part of electric vehicles. Sumit's company actually has been literally mandated to focus on that area. And I personally am really, really interested simply because I believe among the many injustices we have been suffering in this country, the lack of a good public transport system is probably right up there, really in the top five. And I really wish because this whole part about electric buses, because we simply have so few buses. I wish we could look at this in a much bigger way in India in terms of ramping up the numbers at a far faster scale. But telling us all about that, we have Sumit today. So let's see, Sumit, how he tells us and what the story is. So, Sumit, just to start this off, please tell us about what your company believes is the market potential and future for electric buses in India over the next 2 to 5 years.
Thank you, Prasanna. Let me just quickly introduce myself in terms of what we represent. So, GreenCell Mobility is a platform company for Green Growth Equity Fund, which is the first climate fund of India, and mandated with a clear thought of creating environmental impact and executing business in a very large scale, right? And we as a platform are focusing in the mass mobility, which is electric buses as of now. So that's our focus area, right? So coming to your specific questions in terms of what is the total opportunity that this market has, right? So just to give you a broad number, right? India has got around 2 million buses, out of which around 0.2 million, which is around 2 lakh buses, are in the government sector, right? All the state transport units and various government entities own them. Another 5 lakh buses are in the intercity bus movement, mostly private. And then you have another 5 lakh odd buses, which are between school buses and various corporate buses, right? And then we have the rest in various other shape and forms, tourist buses, ambulances, and so it's a fairly large sector, right? And I can tell you that India, unfortunately, has the lowest bus density vis-a-vis a population, right? So mass mobility in itself is a great thing because it is very low on pollution, and electric mobility on top of that is the best thing which can happen because it really has a very little climate impact. So from that perspective, I think the current shortage, which most of the studies which have come up tells that we are short by around 3 lakh buses, which is 15% immediately, and we have a replacement cycle of 5 to 6 years. So every year we have another 2-3 lakh buses which are kind of getting obsolete, right? So, the latest study in DTC, Delhi Transport Corporation, demonstrated that all their buses that they have, right, are more than 10 years old, right? So there's a clear need to revamp this mobility infrastructure, and electric buses clearly is the way forward. Right?
So, Sumit, one of the unique aspects about this sector that we've seen, it's a little bit like the solar sector that we observe, where one of the primary buyers, which is in the power sector, is the discoms. They are generally in very bad shape financially, and similarly in the bus sector, one of the primary buyers at this stage, which is the state transport corporations, they tend to be in bad shape in India more often than not, except for a few. How do you think could we work around that? Because what we've seen in solar, for example, is that the government literally had to set up a new company like SECI. Then you have NTPC, of course. People literally clearly prefer them in terms of credit rating, in terms of viability of projects. Do you think something like that should be done or is possible in the bus sector?
Yeah, so I think the first government initiative of FAME 1 and now subsequently FAME 2 is a step to that direction, right? So they have allocated in the FAME 2, they have allocated 3,500 crores, right, for specifically bus infrastructure and as subsidies which will be routed through the state transport corporation, right? So while very recently CESL, which has been formed to kind of lead this activity from the side of the government, and I feel that they are very well placed to kind of take this challenge of credit worthiness of state transport corporations or mitigate them to a great extent, right? Second thing is like, the concession agreements which have been kind of, in the government side, which have come out, right? Have been brilliant first to start with, right? Because, Niti Aayog has done a brilliant job in terms of coming up with the first version. But, as we have seen in NHAI or SECI or various other contracts, right? The version 2, version 3 are equally as important because it covers a lot of challenges which are faced by the industry as well as the lenders and the ecosystem. So there are a host of changes which needs to be done to make these contracts contractually strong, bankable, and kind of address partial risk which is kind of coming out of the uh, low credit worthiness of some of these state transport corporations. Right now, the current objective of CSL is that they've identified some top 9-10 cities, and they are trying to ensure that they will put in at least 1,000 buses in each of these cities, right? Which is the right way forward, right? In China, if you look into it, the way they kind of did was that they identified the clusters, and they went very heavy on those clusters to kind of completely electrify the fleet, which helps in concentration of effort and concentration of infrastructure, concentration of so to say resources, and manpower is also available. So I think that's the approach CSL is taking, and I think it is a brilliant approach in that direction. So if we broadly look into it, the way I see it is, CSL and maybe like another authority which can be the central authority which can provide a payment guarantee could kind of really address the issue. There could be an alternate option of a state guarantee which can be provided by the specific STUs, because any which way their grants come from the state. I think let's wait for Prasanna a minute, and then we can get.
Sir, we have you back, right? He has low connectivity.
Sumit, why don't you continue?
Yeah.
Sumit, we can hear you, I think.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, no issue. So I was just trying to say that CSL is already mandated with this objective of kind of driving the adoption on the ground, and they are in the process of rolling out 1,000 buses each in the top 9 cities, right? Which will create that critical mass, which will kind of make the sector kind of go on an autopilot mode, right? Having said that, a state guarantee mechanism, certain corrections in the concession agreement, which is more or less realignment, which is a revised version of maybe the concession agreement, can actually make a huge impact in terms of creating acceptability and bankability of these kind of concessions, right? At the end of the day, this sector will only grow if we can attract capital into the sector, all kinds of capital from OEMs, capital from operators, capital from private equity, capital from sovereign funds, and that is when the sector will flourish. So I think the approach should be that if the challenges faced by some of these participants can be removed, right, then it will kind of pave the way for the growth of the sector. And I can tell you that there is a huge potential. A CAGR of 25% looks a very easy task. I can tell you from our experience in the last 18 months of our operations, we have now almost 1,900 buses which are in various stages of implementation, and our plan is clearly to touch 10,000 buses in the next 3 to 5 years, right? And we are already India's #1 e-mobility in terms of the project and the pipeline, and in the next 3 years we are targeting to become world's largest e-mobility player in terms of the buses, right? So that's the growth opportunity the sector has.
Okay. Sumit, I'll again, draw a corollary with the renewable energy sector, where we saw earlier that, both solar and wind needed a lot of subsidies to be actually, driven. And, as recently as 5 years back, you had solar tenders being given away at 7 rupees, 8 rupees per unit. And now when solar actually has become more competitive vis-a-vis thermal, you have massive adoption. In buses, for example, the same issue comes in for me. I mean, isn't there a risk that it could remain a very niche area unless costs come down in a big way? How do buses today, electric buses, compare vis-a-vis your traditional diesel or other buses?
Yeah, so I think that's a very valid question. The basic hindrance in the adoption of electric vehicles was the capital cost of the electric bus, and also related to the charging infrastructure, right? So, for example, a bus that needs to move from point A to point B, and let's assume that point A to point B is more than the single way charge, then there is also an opportunity charging which is required. So, three charge points, which essentially means three transformers, three chargers, and an origination a depot on both sides, right? So that's a huge cost, right? Whereas for a diesel bus you don't need any fixed route kind of a thing, right? But the cost of this electric infrastructure is coming down significantly, right? I have seen that the cost of buses have come down 50% in the last 2 years, right? Primarily because of more and more serious players coming in. Currently the existing mobility market is dominated by the OEMs, right? Because they have to seed their buses, so they really do not have an option but to buy their own buses and deploy them in the contract. So for them, getting the buses at the optimal price is not the priority. Their priority is to get these buses on the ground, right? But for a player like us who is focusing on creating value in terms of creating arising out of the mobility business, our objective is to get the cost of the bus at the right price, right, at the most optimum level, so that we will be able to bring down the cost of operations. Intra-city buses across the globe is a loss-making and subsidized business, which is given the subsidies are given by the government, right? Now, what we need to endeavor is to ensure that our current prices are not very far away from the collections which are done on a daily basis, right? That's where we will achieve the parity, where the state transport corporation or the city transport corporation will not struggle to kind of deploy these buses. Historically in India, these buses, 2 lakh buses with the state corporations are running, they most of these buses are procured, right? Now the clear trend is towards GCC model, gross cost contract model, which will bring down their capex and which will ensure that the overall variable cost comes down significantly, as compared to the diesel operations. So that's our objective, right? So the prices are coming down, both for the buses, charging infrastructure, and as in serious players are coming into this sector and setting up their plants in India. The and Indian localization of these parts are happening. There is a clear trend of reduction of the prices of the infrastructure, including buses and the charger, right? Which will gradually bring the parity. Currently, I can tell you the intercity bus business does not require any kind of an subsidy, right? It is self-sustainable, right? And there are a huge number of buses which are there in the sector. So clearly, this sector is in autopilot, and we don't require any subsidy from to kind of run this business, right? In the intracity, yes, it still requires the subsidy, but clearly the buses cost are coming down.
So, are you suggesting that in the next 2 or 3 years we're going to see significant changes in the structure of this industry?
So
from OEMs, running it to like yours?
Yeah. So if you see China, where world 99% of the buses are in China, right? Electric buses are in China. If you see the trend, what happened was there was a bulk of subsidy which was given for the first 5 years. It ensured that the cost, of the product, like in renewable sector, went down, right? And then the subsidies were gradually tapered off, right? I think this is the trajectory which any new sector will require, and which is the current objective of the government. I think state government and central government are doing their bit to waive off the taxes and creating that favorable ecosystem to kind of support it. And I think we are on the right path, but we need to expedite the adoption and ensure that whether it is a government contract or a private contract, the subsidy should be available. So for example, if somebody wants to electrify the fleet of a school bus, right, or a B2B bus, or maybe let's say intercity bus, why not offer them the subsidy? The end objective is to ensure that the buses are more and more buses are electric. Yeah. See, one thing, Prasanna, we need to understand is now going electric and reduction of pollution is not a choice; it is a necessity. Right? I can just give you a example from 1970 to 2005. Right? in this approximately 35 odd years, right, there were around 250 extreme climate events which happened in the country, right? From
Sure.
2005 till 2021, right, in this 15 years, right, which is half the time the earlier period, right, there are 310 such events which have happened in the industry, which have impacted 75% of in the Indian districts, right?
Sure.
Impacting the livelihood, impacting the the wealth creation, and impacting the common man, right? So I think we are at a stage where massive deployment of electric buses are required, right? I think most of the states have given a mandate that by 2025, 2024, there should be at least 30%, 40% electric. And I think we should be very clear that any government vehicle which is bought from today on, right, should be only electric, right? That's the way forward. So, that's the only way we can control pollution. Vehicular pollution, contributes huge amount of, so to say, pollution to the overall impact, overall pollution, right? And this should be clearly controlled.
So, Sumit, when we talk about electric buses or vehicles for that matter, we always talk about the charging network that goes with it. Now, unlike two-wheelers, which we've heard a lot of today, where the charging network itself can be very informal, sometimes very simple, in buses, I think the strong point actually in this case is that it's a very formal network, very predictable in terms of requirements and specifications. Do you think right now what we're seeing in state tenders is that the tender includes the requirement of setting up the charging network also?
Yeah.
Would that be actually opened up to entrepreneurs outside, and is that an opportunity?
So yes,
Just the
I think
charging part of it.
yeah. So there are two parts to it. One is like in the government tenders, the GCC contracts which come out, right? The responsibility of getting the power should be with the state transport corporation, right? Because it's their premise, right? They know how to get the connection right away and get the connections, right? Similarly, putting a step down transformer and providing electricity at 440 volts should be the responsibility of the state transport corporation. See, the point is like various factors like penalty. I'll give you a simple example of penalty, right? If you put a 10% penalty, how does the financial model work? Is like everybody will put 10% as their base case scenario and the price goes up, right? Similarly, if you put the charging infrastructure requirement, getting the connection, setting up the step down transfer as the responsibility of the operator, the prices goes up for the bid amount, right? So the first part is that the state transport corporation should ensure that the connection is available, and the responsibility of the operator is just to put the charger, right? That is the first thing. Second thing is, the states at some point of time when they see the volume picking up should also use this infrastructure for private parties. And then there are a lot of players who are looking at this opportunity to deploy charger infrastructure on a lease basis or a use basis, to both the government as well as the private sector. So from that perspective, I think that's an opportunity which is there. There are two tenders which have already come out, right? And people are excited about it. As of now, the volumes needs to catch up to ensure that the viability of those charging networks are there.
So I think we'll just quickly have to end fast because we're running a little behind schedule. But tell me, despite everything, all the numbers you spoke about, that the numbers are looking good and all of that, at really at a country level, the numbers are still very small for India.
Yeah.
What do you think is a really a practical, real policy change that could really, really change the game here in India? Because when you mentioned China, and unlike the economy where we say China is 10 times bigger or whatever, in this case we're literally not even 1/100th of China right now. How do we change that number? What
So
would do that?
yeah, so I think the first thing is like concentration of, so to say, activity or subsidy on the specific cities, right? So, for example, I think CSL has got the pulse right of picking up the 9 top cities and kind of focusing on that, putting them 1,000 buses each, right? Second is like allowing the subsidies for non-government projects as well, so that it will lead the adoption. If the charging infrastructure gets created, if the trained manpower is there, if the battery infrastructure is there, then obviously it kind of accelerates the adoption. And one other thing which is very critical is like as of now, when we are using the electricity, right, electric buses, we are displacing pollution, right? We are not eliminating it. What is happening is like the grid is charging the buses, right? And let's say the grid as of now, India has 75% thermal coal, right?
Mostly thermal.
So essentially, it doesn't kind of kills the pollution completely, right? So every electric bus tender should have an option that if somebody is ready to kind of get a renewable energy contract, right, it should kind of, they should be allowed
Makes sense.
without any additional charges to be levied, right? If that happens, the profitability of these projects goes up significantly, right? The cost become more effective, and it will also ensure that the adoption becomes higher, right? Uh, Similarly, there should be various incentives which should be given to the manufacturers to kind of ensure that the manufacturing is localized, right? So that is another challenge that we are currently facing.
Fine, Sumit. I think we'll just have time enough for that. I don't see any questions here,
Yeah.
so we can stop here, right, Shivam?
Yes, sir.
Great having you, Sumit. I hope we'll
Thank
catch
you.
up again soon. And
Thank you.
thanks a lot for your time. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.